Welcome to the second episode of the LAN Partners Podcast. I have big news to start the show off today. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, we've been on SoundCloud, and we've been on YouTube. So if you like what you hear, find us on Facebook, the LAN Partners. Tweet us at the LAN Partners. So if you're someone sitting at home right now and you're just, you don't have a whole lot of time to game and you don't want to spend $60 on a game, this is the podcast for you because we're going to be talking about a lot of different games, whether it be a $60 game or that $20 game from the used section at GameStop. We play a lot of those different types of games. I like to stay current, but I also like to go back and grab a couple of those gems that I passed over 3 years ago. So throughout every episode, we'll be reviewing maybe a newer game, an older game, have nice discussions about these games. For today's episode, we're going to kick it off by going around the horn and just talking about what we're currently playing and maybe a little bit what we've played in the past. Matt and Dave are going to give us a nice review of the division. We're going to have a pretty intense discussion about the NES Classic and the Super Nintendo Classic. And then we'll close the show off with the top 3 controllers of any console. So, Matt, why don't you start us off with what you're playing right now?
All right, so I'm going to have to preface before I start my discussion with this because I recently, if you were listening to the last podcast, I traded in my Xbox One because it was collecting dust. Didn't have any games coming out that I was interested in the foreseeable future. So I ended up trading that in. Also traded in my Vita handheld from Sony because I really had no games for that left either, and that's pretty much a dead console at this point. So I traded those in, and I got a nice credit at GameStop that I put to good use. So right now, I'm playing, as we know, Persona 5, about 21, 22 hours in now. That game's going to take forever. We all know that. And then I'm playing Yakuza 0, which I just kind of got through the intro. So I know that that's going to be another longer game as well. And I'm also playing MLB The Show 17, which is very fun. Road to the Show franchise. Any baseball fans out there should definitely pick up that game for PS4. It's a PS4 exclusive, though, so you do need a PS4 for that one. And I'm also playing Nier Automata, which was Connor's, I think, number 2 on your top PS4 games in our last podcast.
No, it was actually number 3. Number 3.
It was number 3. Okay,
right,
so it was on the list, but it was up there. So I've been playing that as well. So and I guess I'll say this too. I'm known to be that guy that has a lot of games going at once. So that's kind of how I am. I like to experience pretty much most bigger titles that come out. So that's kind of what I've been playing lately.
So Dave is kind of our Counter-Strike StarCraft guy. He still plays, what is that level called? Dust on Counter-Strike, Long A. He's still playing that level on like a daily basis.
Dust 2, my friend, is the map. Just to correct you there. A little bit less on the PC side just because that Switch is brand spanking new, and I had my PC rig for about 2 years. Right now it kind of depends on what's going on. My wife and I just had a baby about a month ago, so gaming has been very limited. However, the Switch is so easy to squeeze some stuff in. That's coincidentally what I'm playing the most of anyhow. Right now I'm currently playing Breath of the Wild, farming Topaz to improve my Twilight armor, which I got from my Amiibo. And then I got Mario Kart 8 Deluxe that my wife and I play on occasion. My wife's favorite game is Puyo Puyo Tetris. And so when we get a couple minutes to game, usually that's what we go for. We've done Mario Kart a couple times, but usually it's Puyo. And then like you heard last time, if you listened to the last podcast, I'm playing NBA Playgrounds a little bit. And then starting in a couple weeks here, my buddies and I are going to be rotating NBA 2K17 back into the schedule once I got a little bit more time to game.
Well, it's funny because I remember really liking Mario Kart 8 on the Wii U, and it seems that it's now your game you're playing on Switch. And
yeah, it's good stuff. I wish I'd gotten into it a little bit earlier.
Like
I was
when
a little
you
bit
had
of
a
a late
Wii U.
bloomer. Yeah, when I had the Wii U, and then I feel a little bit bad about the Wii U because I really only played that thing when people came over. I didn't play a whole lot of it solo. I didn't really have a ton of games to play solo on there, but it was probably my favorite console to play with a group of people. And now that that's gone, obviously that's going to switch over to the Switch. But hopefully, that'll keep going. I already like it more than the Wii U, so it didn't take long.
Well, that leaves me. I have kind of an interesting thing going on right now. I'm usually, pretty good mix between more of older games. Like, for example, I just in the last, 6 to 8 months, I finished Shadow of Mordor, which was, 2012 title, 2011, somewhere around there. Mario Galaxy for the Wii. I played that on the Wii U. Like, I've never played that game before. Last year, I played Bayonetta 1 and 2. Those are both kind of older games. Devil May Cry, I just finished earlier this year. But now, since 2017 is off to such a hot start, I can't pass up some of these games. Like Matt was mentioning Nier Automata and Yakuza 0. Those games are just too good to pass up. So I've been playing a lot of that. And also I have the BioShock collection, which I played the first BioShock when it first came out like a long time ago. But now that the collection came out, I've never played 2 and 3. So I'm definitely into that, and I want to give that a shot because I've never played those. Right now, Nier Automata it's rocking my world. It just keeps getting better. I'm about 25 hours in. It just keeps changing throughout the whole game. I don't know what it's going to do next. Like last night I was playing, and Matt, if you remember me mentioning that, like I just said, like this game just keeps getting better. It just keeps amazes me.
Yeah,
Yakuza
I've heard
0,
you say that a few times.
Yeah, Yakuza 0 too. I haven't got too deep into it. I'm about 12 hours in, so the story's still developing. I'll have more of an opinion on that maybe a couple weeks when I get a little bit deeper into it. On the second game in the BioShock collection, not impressed with BioShock 2. It seems just very derivative of BioShock 1. I kind of want to change from that, but my opinion could change. I'm only a couple hours in. So that will lead us right into another game that came out last year in March, developed by Ubisoft, and that's The Division. Now, Matt and Dave have both have similar experiences and different experiences all in one with The Division, so I'll let Matt tell us why he loved The Division so much.
So yeah, I gave The Division a 9 out of 10. I really loved it, and I think the reason I loved it was because the system. So a little background on Division is that it was advertised as sort of this MMORPG shooter hybrid type game where you're in Manhattan, I believe, and you can go around with your friends and do missions, and you upgrade, you level up, you get experience. And the cool thing that brought me into it though is that you can upgrade your weapons with better stats. So a weapon might get faster reloading or just do more damage or be more accurate, things like that. So that really drew me in because it kind of had a Diablo-esque feeling to me, just in the sense of I got addicted to wanting to keep constantly upgrading my stuff and getting better gear. And that's kind of what drew me in so much. And I like the gameplay. I know a lot of critics talked about enemies being bullet sponges, which they are, and it's obviously not very realistic because you're shooting at human beings. They're not aliens or anything like that. So I know that could be frustrating for a lot of people. I had a different experience from Dave, and I'll let Dave talk about his experience, but I know I played the game mostly solo, which the game wasn't really advertised to be enjoyed that way, but that's kind of how I did it. And I played it. I took 2 weeks off work around Christmas, and I think it took me about 34 hours to beat, and I beat it during those 2 weeks around Christmas time. That's how much I was into it. So I really enjoyed it. And I know me and Dave actually got a chance to play, I think, once for kind of a limited amount of time. But
it's online. It's funny that you mentioned, the 2 weeks, because I remember right before that break that you had, you pretty much just loaded up on like 8 games. You had Bayonetta 1 and 2 that I got you for your birthday last year. You had Battlefield 1. You had that. You had Mafia 3. You had all these games that you just stockpiled. And for whatever reason, The Division came out on top out of all those games. And then
even over Final Fantasy.
Yeah, and then there's Dave. Dave, what do you have to say about this?
Well, I think Matt gave me a perfect segue here. He said we only played a couple times. What he didn't clarify was that if you make it about 2 levels higher than the person you're trying to play with, the game becomes effectively unplayable for the lower level character, where that guy's getting one-shot killed while his buddy is sponging up bullets. I did not like that. I tried to play with multiple people, actually, and every single time, if, we're all busy guys, and Matt had that 2 weeks off, but we're all busy, And I don't have as much time as some of my other buddies who got the game, so we'd play a little bit together while we were around the same level. But once they were 2, 3, 4 levels ahead of me, because the level cap is so low in that game, each level is dramatically different than the other. And without exaggerating, 3 levels lower than one of my buddies, and it was like a revive game, like who could get to Dave first to revive him, because he would just get mowed down, need to be revived. Then they would try to go forward, but I'd get mowed down again. They'd need to revive me. One guy, thank goodness, had one of the med kit packs that he could just throw on the ground that I just hugged the entire match. And it wasn't enjoyable for me. They seemed like they were having a good time. Now that I'm on the cons, I'll just throw my other ones out there. I had no clue what the story was the entire time I was playing that game. From what I can tell, there's a disease. You're a secret agent whose last resort is to save society by killing a bunch of other people who are wandering around the streets. I'm not too sure why that makes sense. The environment was super bland and boring. I felt like I was playing even less average version of GTA, which I also think is a very average game.
We'll get to that later.
Yeah, we'll touch on that another time. That's not this show, right? Yeah. Pros. There were things I liked about it, though. Here's the deal. I hate Ubisoft. I do with all my heart, in the deepest regions of my heart of hatred. I hate Ubisoft. That company is horrible. Shame on them for everything they do. But the very few things they did right, the weapons are cool. The shooting and cover do work, even though I know that I've seen some of the same stuff that Matt's seen about that not being the best, but it works better than some other games I've played. Upgrading weapons, which Matt touched on, was a good idea, and I like that you do it with the different parts of the weapons. I like that I can throw, a new clip on the gun, and it has a boost that doesn't usually relate to clips, but they, added a little bit of flair to the boost. So I can put a clip in my gun that makes me shoot more accurately, even though, that part of the gun doesn't really necessarily do that. Graphics seem good enough. A lot of people were really upset because the E3 trailer of this thing, man, I was pretty sold on it. It looked beautiful. They showed off a game that did not end up being The Division, and that game looks awesome. And I think I would give that game a try if they actually released it. But what we got seemed very different, and I gave it a 5. It wasn't quite as bad as it probably sounds, but I'm very salty at Ubisoft in general for everything they do. By the way, if you were excited about South Park, that got delayed because, that's Ubisoft again. And no, Nintendo doesn't get a pass on there. It so happens that Zelda is several 100,000 light years ahead of all the garbage that Ubisoft puts out. So
now there's another Ubisoft title, R6, Rainbow Six Siege, that you seem to have.
One person has played here.
You seem to have a different opinion on Siege compared to The Division when it comes to Ubisoft. Now, Matt and I both played Rainbow Six Siege. We owned it. We played the Terror Hunts with you.
Asterisk, barely played. Go ahead.
So we played the Terror Hunts with you. We didn't like it, but you liked it. I mean, just quickly, what did you like about R6 compared to The Division?
Totally different game. R6 is more of like a Counter-Strike. I do enjoy the team versus team aspect of it. I'm gonna kind of stick away from Terror Hunt because I think we could discuss that in another video about how that's evolved over the years. But I enjoyed the team gameplay. I enjoyed the destructible environments. I don't even remember anything being destructive in The Division. They just wanted to make it some giant map full of the same old building, copy and paste it over and over again. I liked that each character in R6 had kind of a MOBA feel. They each had their own abilities that they could do something a little bit different than the other. My favorite character was Blackbeard. He was one of the DLC characters, and he had a shield that he could mount on the front end of his rifle. So there's just a lot of interesting things. There was a guy who put booby traps in doorways. There's a guy who could blow up even reinforced walls. There's a guy with a sledgehammer, and you could beat people to death with it, or you could pound through walls to create new ways to get to different rooms.
Yeah, so it just sounds like you just had a
better game.
Just had a better experience with Rainbow Six Siege, and there's nothing wrong with that. Just kind of wanted to touch on that since we were on the subject of Ubisoft. moving on to our discussion for today, we are talking about the NES.
Wait, one last thing. Let's go back to one more. I'm so sorry. I also have to point out that game's online mode, the bread and butter of that game, unplayable for the first 2 weeks. Despite me buying the gold edition, I dropped $90 on that game to not play it for about 2 weeks. Then when it did become playable, Ubisoft is so horribly trash at making an online environment that it was glitchy up until I revisited it, months later to a much better experience, but it should not take that long. Go ahead.
No, there's plenty of problems with Ubisoft. There's no disagreeing with that. But the NES Classic has been an interesting topic to talk about because Matt and I both own the NES Classic. My NES Classic is actually from Dave. He found it for me. It was a hot item coming off the shelves there. It was tough to find. Matt got his hands on one within the first couple weeks. He lucked out on that, but I was unable to. So, talking about the NES Classic, Matt, what do you love about the NES Classic?
I think, I'll start by saying, too, that the NES Classic was extremely frustrating and hard to get, which I think Nintendo needs to learn from for the SNES Classic that they announced, because why take away the supply for such a high demand? It just blew my mind away that they treated it that way. I know a lot of people feel the same way I do about that. But yeah, it took me a few failed attempts to buy one. I had to wait outside Targets at 5 a.m. and hope that I was there early enough, and I finally landed on one. The thing that drew me to it mostly was just kind of how it looked. I thought it looked really cool. I thought it was a nice kind of piece to have, on the shelf in the house, and it looked really awesome. And obviously it's nice to go back down memory lane and check out some of those retro games and some of the ones that just don't hold up very well anymore, but it's still kind of cool to place yourself back in that time period when, you're hearing all those old blocky sounds and the gameplay is not that smooth, and it's kind of especially fun to play with each other too, because I know Connor, me and you played like Tecmo Bowl a lot, and we got into some Mario Brothers a little bit, some of the co-op games on there. So, I mean, we had our fun with it, and I think that's what drew me to it, was just kind of the nostalgia of it and just how it looked. That was a big factor for me.
The thing I love about the NES Classic was, the main look and just being able to play all those games on a smaller version of it, where, like you were saying, playing with a friend. I played 4 hours in one day with my good friend Kevin. I had a friend over from work, and we played for 4 hours in a day. I've played it hours by myself, playing Tecmo Bowl, Mario, Legend of Zelda, which we call the original Dark Souls because it's so hard. But this whole time, throughout this whole process of the NES Classic, there was a guy named Dave who just refused to accept that it was going to be a success. And I want him to just explain to us why. Why not a success?
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and throw out there that the NES Classic is extremely awesome for small children who never got to play the original. Personally, I have all the games worth playing on my 3DS that I paid $200 for, and I have the Virtual Console games, all of them that I want. I've already bought all those Nintendo. You're not getting another $60 for me to rebuy the same games that look just as good on my 3DS. That's not even including, by the way, my Game Boy games that I have on the Virtual Console. They're my Game Boy Advance games that come from the Virtual Console. And then go ahead and throw the DS and 3DS catalog of games in there. I'm kind of on the other side of the fence with the aesthetics of it. I think that, again, in like a little kid's room would be amazing. I would love for my son to get his hands on one of these. If it did come out again and my son was old enough to actually play it, 100% I'm buying it, because then he can maybe get a little bit of that feeling that I got when I was a kid. But I don't really like the clutter it creates as of right now. I already have a lot of video game systems on my TV stand. I even have a Japanese Super Famicom on a different TV in my house that's actually a legitimate Famicom, not a USB stick with a fancy case like the Classic. And it's just, I just can't do it. It was really hard to do that. And it's worth noting that before we started this show, I had joked with these guys about calling the theme of this episode the "Things That Dave Doesn't Approve Of" episode.
Salty Dave.
I know I probably am coming across as, some mega elitist, but it just literally, I promise, it just so happened this episode had the Division and an NES in it. I'm not that guy, but I am that guy this episode for sure.
Well, with the NES Classic, all the success it had, Nintendo suddenly pulled the plug for whatever reason, and we've talked about that before, on our own about why would they pull the plug on the NES Classic suddenly. It just seemed like a talking point, like, hey, let's get them to talk about Nintendo, because with the Switch right around the corner after the NES, they just stopped making the NES. Now that they got our attention, now it's time for the Switch. But then they came out and said, hey, we're going to make an SNES Classic, and I'm stoked. If they made a Nintendo 64 Classic, I would buy that. If Sony came out and said, hey, I'm going to make a PS1 Classic, I would buy that. I think this whole classic idea is just amazing. I want a whole shelf full of little mini systems on my shelf, and that would look so cool. I think it's the same way people buy little replica Stanley Cups and little replica World Series trophies for their favorite teams. You know what I mean? It's just awesome to me. I don't even care if I never play it. I don't even care. Like before I even got the NES Classic, I said I want that just sitting on my shelf. I don't care if I never play it. There's a few games I want to play, but if I put 4 hours into it, $60 is worth it to me.
Yeah, it's a win-win for everybody because the companies get their money, and we get the nostalgia and the convenience of having these classic games and a nice, cool piece of art, and having that at our disposal, I think, is a great idea.
I think
it just takes up too much space, man. I mean, if you want Nintendo art, I collect amiibos, unfortunately, now because of The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. You're welcome, Nintendo. And these take up enough space on their own, and they're small. They're very small. I could probably fit 3, 4, 5, 6 amiibo in the amount of space that like a classic console takes up. Connor, I know that you have a 3DS that you have access to. Matt, you have a 3DS, am I correct?
Yep.
So my big thing is, if you've never, it kind of goes back to what Connor and I were talking about on the last episode. He's never had Smash Brothers. So when Smash Brothers comes out for Switch, there's a chance he's going to buy it just because he's never had them. So I could see like the classic consoles, if you never owned any of these games, like a repurchased, able to play it right now thing, I could totally see it. Where I struggle for me personally is I just bought all these games for my 3DS, and they run beautifully on there, and I can take them with me, much like the Switch, and it's mobile and it looks great. And the incentive for me to get the NES Classic was just extremely low. SNES is going to be even lower because I feel like that's more recent, and I have a Famicom, Super Famicom. N64, no way would I purchase an N64 when my N64 works, and I truly feel like I got all the games I'd want to play on there. And then, GameCube's a whole nother topic. I'm not a huge fan of the GameCube. I love all those other consoles. GameCube I'm not a huge fan of. And then I got the rest of the Nintendo consoles after that still work, and they operate and they function perfectly. So I think it might be one of those things. If I never bought all those games, I don't know how I'd feel about the NES Classic, but I'm missing probably the worst games on there, and that's okay.
I've openly said that if the SNES Classic came out and it had the exact same library of games that I own in my closet right now, I'd still buy it. Moving on to news, one quick thing I want to ask Matt about. Today, Witcher was announced to have a Netflix show, but it's based off the book. So, Matt, are you watching this show?
So I haven't read the books. I've played all the games. Huge fan of the Witcher video games, but I haven't read any of the books. So I think I will give it a shot. I'll watch, the first couple episodes maybe, see how it's going. And, if I'm not interested, then that's just how it's going to be. But if it turns out to be something cool, then great. I would love to see it have more success.
Yeah, you're by far the biggest Witcher fan I know, so it'll be interesting to see if this show's any good. So I think it's time to bring this episode home with a nice list of top 3 controllers of any console. Matt, you started us off last time, so Dave, how about you start us off this time with your number 3 controller of all time on any console?
Sure. I also want to clarify that this is controllers, so that will dramatically change my list as keyboard and mouse are not considered controllers. Number 3, I'm going to say the PlayStation 4 controller. I like the feel of it in my hand. I'm not a huge fan of the layout of the thumbsticks. I do like having them offset like an Xbox controller, but it does feel nice, and I think personally it's a big improvement over PS3, and I would make it my number 3.
Matt?
My number 3 is going to be an Xbox 360 controller. I know a lot of people say it's critically acclaimed as one of the best controllers ever made, but unlike Dave, I kind of prefer the sticks to be close together, how they are on the PlayStation controllers. So,
well, I'm gonna go with, for my number 3 is the best Sony controller in my opinion is the PS2 controller. I think that was their best controller. I thought PS3, I didn't like the trigger system. PS4 kind of adopted the same trigger system from the PS3, but I thought Sony got it right with PS2 and kind of took some steps back from there. Dave, what was your number 2 controller?
My number 2 is actually a very new controller. It's the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, which gets number 2 simply for being very similar to the exact style of controller I like, which is the Xbox One controller and the Xbox 360. It's really well made. I love that it has the chip reader in it, so I can use my Amiibos with that controller. I don't have to break out the Joy-Con every time. It's a good alternative to the Joy-Con for longer play sessions. It's a little more ergonomic, so number 2, no-brainer for me, Switch Pro.
Matt, what was your number 2?
My number 2 is actually going to be the Xbox One controller. It's my controller of choice for my PC gaming. That for any games, like Dave, I prefer mouse and keyboard, but for any games, certain games like, racing games or shooting games, or not shooting games, sorry, just any game that I feel like just feels more comfortable on a controller. For me, I go to the Xbox One controller, and I like that kind of grip on the back of it. Feels nice because I have one of those newer kind of limited edition ones, so that feels good to me. So I'm going to say Xbox One for 2.
My number 2 is kind of reaching back into some nostalgia, is the Nintendo 64 controller. I thought that I didn't like where you had to put your hand on the middle part of it with the joystick and then have to go to the D-pad on the other side of it. That wasn't extremely convenient, but I thought from the analog stick or whatever it's called and the buttons on the right side, I thought that was a perfect setup. I thought that felt really nice, but the D-pad I did not like too much. Dave, what was your number 1?
As a side note, I would still play Mario 64 with the N64 controller. If you ask me over my 3DS any day, give me that N64 controller. Just the feel of Mario 64 feels different. My number 1 is, obviously I've compared everything to it because I think it's the most genius controller ever made. The Xbox One, and specifically the Xbox One S controller that has the Bluetooth capability that Matt was talking about, that you can connect to your PC easily. It's the most comfortable controller. It's, in my opinion, the most versatile controller because you can use it on multiple different consoles, including my Steam box that I got, Steam Link, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so, I use the Xbox One S controller in 3 different platforms that I have, and it is, there's just something about it, man. The thumbsticks are perfect. I like that they concave in. Buttons are perfectly spaced apart. Rumble feels nice. Triggers are spot on like they've always been in Microsoft controllers. That's my number 1.
Matt, I'm curious to hear your number 1 because I don't know. What is it?
I don't know. My number 1 is the PS4 controller. Wow. I really loved it. I don't know. When I first got my PS4, I put that controller in my hands. I just like the weight of it. Ergonomically, it feels good in my hands. I like the thumbsticks that they have. Kind of like what Dave was saying, they do have a little concave into them, which feels nice to me. And the buttons just feel good. It feels durable, feels reliable. And I think that's a great controller for me.
Well, my number 1 is actually your guys', Dave's number 1, and your number 2 is the Xbox One controller. I think Microsoft got it just right on the perfect controller in every way. I don't have any complaints whatsoever. Where on the other side of the PS4 controller, I don't like. I feel like it's longer. it feels awkward in my hand after a while. I don't like the PS4 controller.
Do you guys remember the prototype controller for PS4 when they were releasing like the underground prototype, that silver one that looked like a boomerang?
Oh yeah, I do remember seeing that.
That I want to hold that controller because that one looks like when you get mad. You know how some people throw their controllers when you get mad? Well, no, you just throw that thing and it'll come right back to you like a boomerang. That's what I think that would have been good for some people.
So that was episode 2 of the LAN Partners Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. Again, we're on Facebook, Twitter, SoundCloud, YouTube. As soon as this is done, I'm going to send out all the links. Please follow us on Twitter or whatever you do on Twitter. I'm new to the whole social media thing, so I'm trying to figure it out. It took me about an hour and a half just to set up a Twitter account, so we're getting there. But thanks for listening.